Well, welcome to this, our 17th podcast. As we turn today to look at Nehemiah and Esther, we are going to be focusing on those two books. Next week, we will focus solely on the book of Job, give it its own week. So we start with the narrative of Nehemiah. The tradition is that Ezra is the one who wrote the story down, but that it is the story of Nehemiah as the ruler in Israel as they were rebuilding the wall. The captives are coming back and they begin to rebuild the city of Jerusalem. At one point, they are building with a sword in one hand and a bricklayer's trowel in the other as they work on rebuilding the city. Nehemiah is truly a good ruler, brings back the people to their grounding in the covenant and living out the covenant. It was striking that Nehemiah wouldn't let the foreigners that were still in the land, those that had intermarried, even help with the rebuilding. Very committed to this idea of purity of covenant. At this point in the history of the scriptures, there was a great deal of struggling around this question of how we relate to those outside of our faith.
I think just part of just seeing in the beginning, it was just part of the things that would just conform me was how he went into a confession for his people. Like from the very start, when he heard that they were coming back, he started confession. He started praying for success, even for him, and that he would find favor to do God's word and to get him into thing. And I guess I forgot to think that I know I've read it, but it didn't just approach me differently of him being a cupbearer at the beginning of the time, to the king. And he approached the king to get permission to go and to build and to do all that. And like you said, how strict he was for that time, but also in the time that this wasn't an easy time for them. I mean, there was famine involved. The whole economy would not have been the type of economy we would think of where you could build all this stuff in a town that was completely ruined. I mean, and you kind of saw that with the reactions of the others in the area who kind of got jealous when they started rebuilding. They just keep saying things like, "Well, they got these burnt stones. How are they gonna build on these things? They're just gonna fall over again." So it was like a really thing that there wasn't a whole lot of confidence of what he could do. But with Nehemiah, it was a lot about he knew he had God on his side, and with God on his side, they knew they could do what needed to be done, and whether that was holding a weapon in one hand and a brick thing in another, or whatever it was, they were able to accomplish what needed to be accomplished. And it was just one of those things that was very neat to be able to read about.
One of the things that I found very challenging, encouraging, in chapter 5 of Nehemiah, we get to the part where Nehemiah calls them back to the covenantal call for economic justice. When we were reading through the laws of the Jubilee and the Sabbath economics, you and I talked about the fact that there's not a whole lot of evidence that the people of Israel moving into the land ever practiced those things. When Nehemiah and the folks returned, he took that very seriously, and he took the rich folks around him to task for not being a caring part of the community and oppressing their neighbors, charging interest and not returning land. And that vision of a deep economic justice is challenging.
It is.
It's very challenging for us in our society. Don't want to take us into any issues of partisan politics, but you do have to wonder what would happen if somebody took the wealthy of our country to task for not living into the covenant,
right? Yeah,
and how that might play out. Quite sure that the wealthy of ancient Israel didn't like it any more than we would have
today. That's right. That's right. I mean, part of in my book, in my Bible from the Common English, which is also a Wesley Study Bible, it highlights words, and one of the words that it highlighted in this section between 5 and 6 was abundance, and it said clearly. Our own world is not unlike Nehemiah's, where economic systems crushed the vulnerable, leaving many without health care, education, decent housing, adequate employment, or nutritious food. Many lose their homes to the unscrupulous practices of some mortgage lenders. Nehemiah's charge is particularly relevant. His bold move to forgive debt is probably most disconcerting. Could mortgage lenders return foreclosed homes to families debt-free? Could we provide health care to every sick person? Could we ensure that every child whom God sends to us would be guaranteed nutritious food, decent housing, and education? Could we follow Nehemiah by responding to systems that create scarcity and suffering, by redistributing the earth's abundance so all may have enough? And I thought that was so relevant. And I thought, gosh, when we think about what goes on in our world today and the ones that do that, I thought, how do you not think of that in our own, that we have such an abundance? And this was the thing, like, even though here, it's like he redistributed the things so that everybody could have enough. And that was just a powerful thing that stuck out to me in this aspect.
Yeah, you mentioned John Wesley. He practiced that same kind of ethic. Wesley wrote that every penny he spent on himself, he felt like he stole from the poor. That's quite a statement.
Yes, it is.
Quite a statement. The Nehemiah has the entire law read read to the people, that they might hear the word and know the scriptures. It was a very oral time, and the only way folks could learn it was to hear it read. And so he had the stand, the platform set up, and they stood there and just read. Just read. When we lived in Rocky Mount, a number of the churches did the same thing. We had folks volunteering and reading through the scriptures on the public square. Not many folks came to listen, but it was an interesting experience for us.
Yeah, and it was interesting too, because I think about when a lot of traditions in our churches, when the gospel is read, that we stand, and it was interesting to hear that when they read, the people stood as he opened the scroll up. It was that the people stood to hear, and after he said it, after he blesses it, and the people say amen, and they bow, and then they worship with their face as these things are going. And I thought it was just a really cool thing to think about how much they respected the word in this instruction of Moses that was written. Well, we know so many years ago, even from here, from this time, we read
1,000 years earlier.
Yes, and how this is still very important and prevalent to them, to that point where you hear of things, that them doing things that wasn't done before. You didn't necessarily see people standing or bowing. You heard them read, and then a lot of them repenting and encouraging because the people weren't doing what they did. But this was a different aspect of. It was like a moving, because it even said that they got emotional about hearing this, and they were encouraging not to get emotional, but to put it in place and to do it.
Yep. And in the course of that reading, they came across the festival of booths,
Yeah.
and it says in chapter 8 that they kept the festival of booths that had not been kept since the days of Joshua. Again, this image of bringing back the returning to the purity of the covenant and living into it. Well, anything else from Nehemiah before we turn to Esther that really stuck out for you?
I don't. I think just it was just really the prevalence of Nehemiah, and you hear this throughout. It was a consistency of having them remember what God had done for them. And like even in chapter 9, you go through and it's a whole thing of remembering God's mighty deeds, and it's almost like a history of what they just went through and what God has done for them. So again, it was that part of hearing, because they didn't nothing written, but they had to hear it over and over to be reminded of what God had done for them, and the importance of it. But even to the point later, as they get this part of it, it talks about how they bring their contributions, their first fruits, or their first, and it talks about bringing the 10th of the produce, or 10th of the gifts, or whatever they had to give. This was their contributions to that, of being able to do that. And so I think it was just those things of the importance of how we even think about things today, of that going through there.
I think sometimes we forget that the word tithe means a tenth.
Yeah.
We use the phrase tithes and offering and worship, and unfortunately, for most of us, it isn't a tithe. It isn't a tithe. The majority of folks in the church, in United Methodist churches in the United States, give a little less than 2%. It's hard to call that a tithe. That's why last year we used the image of stepping up. I know that it's hard for folks to go from a small amount to a big amount in a one big jump. But to go from 2% to 3% and 3% to 4%, I know when we were younger and trying to step into tithing, one of the things that we did was when we received raises, and I've not always received raises every year, but there was a time when we did, and when we received raises, we just didn't take. I mean, we took the raise, but used that then as a tithe to move us closer. Lived on the same amount, and that was an easier way to do it. What's been your experience with tithing?
I mean, it's been good. I mean, I don't remember. I mean, I remember learning as a young age, even in Sunday school class, them giving us like 10 dimes in a thing, and explaining to us what it meant if we were going to truly tithe, what that meant. And then it was easy, because you're like, well, look, you have 10 and you're only required to give one of those away. You still have 9 of those left. And for you're like, well, it was great, and then eventually, of course things go on, but you learn, you do then. And I've always found that through tithing, even times like where I could have said, you know what, God, I can't do it this time. But when I did, and I still remained faithful, I've never gone without.
Right.
And so he's always provided. And if it wasn't through whatever, it would be amazing that week that someone would say, hey, why don't you come to dinner or something? Or why don't we do something, let's go lunch or do something. And I would think to myself, okay, I see what you're doing. It was just a matter of trusting God that he's still going to provide no matter what it is you're going through, that you continue to give. And that's what I've done. I've always have continued to give, and it's just been, like I said, I've just gone through, and I've never been to a point where I've gone without. That he's been the sole provider, and that puts a lot of, you can put that faith and trust in him to know that he's got you, you know.
I think it's interesting, you know, in for so many in the church in the United States, finances are the part of life that is very separate from faith.
Yeah.
Whether it is this idea of a system of justice where we make sure that we are buying from organizations that care for their workers, or we are giving 10% to the ministry of God in whatever form that takes. It is a part of our life of faith. It's it's central to who we are.
It absolutely is. I mean, I wholeheartedly agree, and I can say as a witness that yes, I might not always have to be able to go to take a vacation or do something like this. You know, things that I want to do, I can take time away. You know, you might not be able to go to an extravagant place one time, but for me, the main important thing is I'm given to God, which is what I'm supposed to do first, and then the rest will come later.
I agree.
So,
I agree wholeheartedly. Well, we move now to Esther, one of my very favorite books of the scripture. It's interesting. It is unique in the role that it gives to God, which is essentially no role.
Yep.
Essentially, God is behind the scenes in all of it. God never does or says anything.
Right.
It's all the characters, and it's the gathering of this story of Hadassah, which is her given name.
Yeah.
And the way that God worked through
her.
Hadassah and Mordecai. We in the very center of the story is that iconic moment when Haman has bought the rights to kill all the Jews. He's going to kill all of them because he's mad at one of them, Mordecai. And so he has bought the right to do that. And Mordecai stands outside of the palace in sackcloth and ashes. Esther sends out word, and he won't wash his face and come inside. And Esther asked, what's wrong? And she finds out. And in iconic, just probably one of my favorite moments of the scripture, in chapter 4, Mordecai had this message delivered to Esther. Do not imagine that you of all the Jews will escape with your life by being in the king's palace. On the contrary, if you keep silent in this crisis, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from another quarter, while you and your father's house will perish. And who knows? Perhaps you have attained to royal position for just such a crisis. Just such a beautiful declaration of what it means to live in challenging times, that there's no part of privilege that we might have, whether it's wealth or position or standing, that should not be yielded to the work of God. And that no matter what, God will still bring justice. And maybe whatever we have is for just such a time as this, as the King James
it
has
says,
it.
yeah. And I think you see a lot of this because it was truly with he's saying, like the if you don't speak up, if you don't do this, it's just going to come from somebody else would do it, and your family would do it, and it just. I think I get so reminded with things going on in today's world. We're talking about things. It's like so many times I've thought to myself, okay, if we don't speak up as followers of Jesus, to support people, to stand up for injustice, to stand up for oppression, to do the things that's happening literally like similar here, then again,
God will raise up deliverance from another quarter.
Yes, and that's not what we as Christians want to happen, because what does that make us look like? If we're supposed to be the example and the followers, what does that make us look like if we're not doing what
Absolutely.
God has asked us to do?
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. I fundamentally believe that that God will not raise up deliverance apart from the person of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
But God might
Yeah.
have to raise up deliverance apart from the church.
Yeah.
And that ought to scare us to no end.
Yep.
There are needs going on in our world. There are people that are dying of loneliness. There are people that are hungry. There are people that do not know grace. And to just stay comfortable in the in our church setting is just, if you pardon me for saying so, sinful.
Yeah. When and this is the thing, it's like when we get to this and you think about what's going on here, Mordecai, Esther know that. They know what's going on. Haman is just too overtaken by the power and the wealth that he's received. And and he just is.
Well, and I think it's
this craziness.
The interesting thing is that what is driving Haman crazy is not that he doesn't have enough wealth and power.
It's the others.
It's that Mordecai might have a little.
Yeah.
And how often we get so caught up in our own vanity that we begrudge an instrument of God.
Yep.
Well, it works out for Hadassah and her people. She throws two parties. I always wondered about the two parties. I don't know. Maybe Duke Divinity teaches this better, but Esther throws one party and invites Haman, and the king says, "Anything you want, I'll give you. Yeah. Just tell me anything you want." And so she asks for a second party. And it's at the second party that she asks for her people, not the first one. Now, in between, the king has a restless night and reads history, and in the history learns about Mordecai. So I guess maybe the Spirit told Esther, not yet, not yet. Need to ask for one more. I'll get him tonight. And maybe that's the meaning. I don't know.
That was, it's a part of that scene, I think, was when he has that, and then he has Haman have to be the one that does the honoring. And, here Haman thinks he's going to be the one that's honoring the whole time and all this fantastic stuff that's going to happen. And then he says to Haman, "I want you to do this for Mordecai." It's the very person that Haman I mean, just to not want to be around. And he was so like, I mean, even at the end, he said, after he does this thing, he said he goes home feeling great shame when his head was covered. And at that point, his friends and his wife said, you know, you're about to lose now, you know, like you're done. The Jewish people are going to win, you know, where before it was, this is what you can do. Now it was like, nope, that's a sign. They're like prophesying about what's to happen.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, but to think about that he had to be the one to do that after being it's just one of those.
So this the story of Esther gives us creates the festival of Purim, as it is known, for the casting of lots, the pur. In modern Jewish households, the festival of Purim is a great celebration for the children of the community. It's a carnival. The little girls dress up as Hadassah, dress up as princesses, and the little boys dress up as Mordecai, and everybody comes, and their booths around the hall for games and food, and the story of Esther is read, and as the story of Esther is read, every time Esther or Mordecai's name are read, the children cheer, and whenever Haman's name is read, they boo. It's just quite the celebration, quite the festival of faith as we remember this important moment where God is at work, and we hear and know the power of God in our midst. And well, we draw today to a close. Next week, we kind of head in the other direction in a great many ways. Next week, we will focus on the book of Job as we go through that monumental story in our faith. And we discuss suffering and meaning and grace and all of those things. We hope that you will come and join us, and we look forward to talking to you again. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.